Hello and welcome to The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. And this Soul of Business program, I love doing this show. And I love doing this show for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is the guests that I get to host on the show. And today I've got a very special guest for us. This is someone that I've known for some time. We initially started as a professional relationship when I did some executive coaching with her, almost 10 years ago, I think it was.
Quite a while ago, yeah.
Martina Welkhoff is a serial entrepreneur. And that in and of itself isn't particularly unusual. There's a lot of entrepreneurs out there, but the space that she operates in is really intriguing. As a woman in tech, she has founded 3 organizations in particular, all of them highly successful. They've all done extraordinarily well. But more than that is, and this is what I wanted to have her on for, is some of the work that she's doing in promoting growth with entrepreneurial talent in the tech space, specifically organized around women. And I love what you're up to, Martina. I loved working with you when we were working together, and I am just thrilled to have you on the show. So welcome, and we'll get a little bit more in your background here as we start the conversation. But just welcome to the show.
Thank you. So good to see you, Blaine.
You as well. And I'd be very remiss here if I didn't just acknowledge for the audience at large, the brand new addition to your family, a new baby girl. So congratulations, yes. Katrina.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Another, I like to say another woman in XR in the world.
Perfect. And we'll talk about what XR means here in just a minute as well, because that's part of the name of the fund that you're heading up. When you talk about, or when I talk about the soul of business, and this is the question that I ask all of the guests that come on here, that phrase itself, the soul of business, what does that bring up for you? And this is going to be an interesting, because we haven't rehearsed this, I haven't even queried you on this necessarily. So when you hear the phrase, the soul of business, what's it bring up?
Yeah, well, the word that immediately comes to mind with that phrase is purpose. I think for me, connection to soul is connection to purpose, and what that means for each person obviously is very distinct. But that's been an important thread through my career, and I think through most of the entrepreneurs I like to work with, is a strong connection to, I think as Simon Sinek would say, the why, the heart of the matter. And to me, business for the sake of business, devoid of that strong sense of personal purpose, is never going to be as fulfilling for the individual or the team, and in many cases won't be as successful as well, because particularly when it comes to starting a business and running an early stage company, without that connection to the why and the purpose, it's very difficult to maintain the stamina and dedication needed to get through those first few major hurdles and yeah, so I think it's absolutely essential. There's a lot of words that people use for a similar concept, whether it's passion, or there's a lot of talk about grit as well, which is connected. But I think that whole package is kind of captured in the soul of business, and just so essential to making things that are really impactful and ultimately drive meaning in the world.
A couple of things that you mentioned there. One is, entrepreneurs that I like to work with. So there's some discrimination there in terms of who you actually end up partnering with in the journey. But the other piece here, and I'm going to talk about that one in a minute, but the other one you mentioned was grit. I look at business as kind of a spiritual discipline. It's an opportunity for me to really bring out the best in me while I'm bringing out the best in my organization, so to speak. And I was actually hosting, my other show is The Office Hours with my partner, David Meltzer. And we do a live cast every Thursday, The Soul of Business. And we had Joe DeSena on today from the Spartan Race organization. And he's a very big believer in grit. He uses that word a lot. And the idea there is, to be challenged, to bring, none of us really know what we're capable of until we're faced with some challenge. And And the bigger the challenge, the more of me I need to bring to the table. And I
Mhm.
think from an entrepreneurial perspective, you've started 3 organizations, and I was with you in the early one when that got to running, and there were challenges. There were
Mhm.
challenges, and then when you went over from and that first one was called Zealous, and then you went to Convene VR, and you started doing work in the VR space, which was not a space that you had played with much at all.
Mhm.
So I'd be interested in hearing from you, from your perspective as an entrepreneur, and this is not a question about the challenges of funding, which
Mhm.
most people are familiar with, but moving into a domain like VR, which you had some cursory information and knowledge about, but what were some of the things that it brought out in you that you didn't know were there that needed to be
Mhm.
brought out to
Mhm.
succeed?
Well, it was a huge leap. And I joke sometimes that, I went from, because my first company was in mobile gaming, which there were a lot of people moving from the gaming industry into virtual reality at the time, but it's an entirely new medium. And so, although a lot of the lessons I learned as an entrepreneur the first time around could apply, the space, the technology, there were a lot of unknowns, and it was very humbling to make a move in that direction. With VR specifically, I think one of the advantages is that, at least at that time, 2015, 2016, it was new to most people. I mean, there are exceptions to that. There are some great leaders who have been in this space a long time and doing some experimental work, dating back to the 60s. But those people are rare and far between. Most people currently in the industry are relatively new to the medium themselves. So there was an element of openness and curiosity. And I found the community I dove into early on to be very, very welcoming and eager to share knowledge and collaborate. And I think that's one of the things actually that really drew me to the space in general is it felt to me what I imagine the early days of the internet may have felt like, where there's so much creation, there's so much newness, and the culture that coalesces around that it attracts a really unique type of person, someone that's not afraid to take risks, someone that's like I said, extremely curious and creative, and kind of a little crazy. There's an element of you have to have a certain flavor of craziness, and that happens to be a type of crazy I really enjoy and thrive on. So those were all the things that attracted me to it. And the learning curve has been steep, but also thrilling. And the impact we could have in these early days, is outsized because of the precedent that it sets. So that's ultimately what convinced me to dig my heels in and really look for the places where I could have the most leverage in terms of impact.
Okay. Yeah. You mentioned a couple of things. I mean, one, what you offered up was the perfect, I think, dictionary description of an entrepreneur. Curious. I mean,
Just that dash of crazy too.
just a little dash of crazy,
Mhm.
those sorts of things. And the idea, and I was really struck by this in one way here, the idea of creativity, aliveness, the energy that is present in an entrepreneurial environment. For me, that speaks to the presence of the soul
Mhm.
of whatever businesses are being cogitated cogitated on, and and this was kind of interesting in terms of the incubator that you ended up creating. And this is WXR. Now you've got now you have WXR Fund, which is the
Mhm.
venture capital piece here. But I want to talk a little bit about WXR as an incubator. So
Mhm.
you were successful with Zellist, and that got sold to the University of Washington. That was a nice transition point. And then you moved to Convene VR, and from there you went into the incubator cycle. Now I'm marking this out as an interesting pathway, just kind of a
Mhm.
migrational piece here. So leveraging your entrepreneurial spirit into an entrepreneurial incubator, that's
Mhm.
an interesting jump. Um, it's not without precedent, and you can connect the dots looking backwards, but when you start thinking about, you had what, 26 companies that
Mhm,
graduated out of the incubator successfully. So
mhm.
what was the driving force there for you as an entrepreneur and as somebody that was actually fostering this growth and these ideas with other people? And what did you pay attention to that allowed them to be successful?
Well, what ultimately convinced me to, as I often say, make that transition from founder to funder is what I really saw as a time limited opportunity to influence the foundation of this next computing paradigm as we move from two-dimensional to three-dimensional computing. There's a lot of opportunity there, not just to change the technology and user experience, but to change the actual industry and the norms and the culture. And so a part of that, big part of what I saw in that opportunity was to normalize women in leadership and from the beginning bolster the numbers overall, which is key to this whole equation, but also change the story and make sure that the women who were already doing important work and establishing leadership in the space were properly credited and showcased, and that we could, build a platform on which those stories could be told. And so part of it was right place, right time. I connected with my co-founders, Malia Probst and Abby Albright, and Marco De Moraz of the Venture Reality Fund was a key person early on as well. And, we had a lot of conversations around how crucial these next few years, this was, 2015, 2016, like I said, how crucial those first few years of this wave of computing would be in setting what would become the trajectory for that next wave. And so, I still consider myself an entrepreneur at heart. I love building products and companies, and that may be a future chapter for me again. But in this moment, I think the investment, being an investor and starting with the accelerator allowed me to work with a lot of different companies and have sort of that industry perspective versus focusing in on my own thing at the moment. And so that appealed to me in resetting what the narrative could be. And with the 26 companies, I mean, it was really exciting. We decided to start with the accelerator first because when we started floating the thesis, which is really focused on that intersection of women and what we now call spatial computing, which is kind of a bigger term. XR is another catch-all term for augmented and virtual reality, as well as artificial intelligence as it applies to that 3D computing paradigm. So natural language processing, computer vision, machine learning. And that whole category is so nascent that the pushback we got initially from prospective investors was, well, are there even women in the space? Where's the data? And that data set didn't really exist. It's early stage data is hard to come by in the best of times, and especially when you layer on demographic information, very, very difficult. So we decided to build the data set ourselves, as well as build our credibility and build our brand with the accelerator, which we launched in early 2018. And we had applications from all over the world, hundreds of applications from every continent except Antarctica. Ultimately, we had Australia was the last to join the batch, but we did get some from Australia as well. And so suddenly we had this incredibly robust data set and could tell a very tangible story and quantify the opportunity in ways that we couldn't have had we not started with that. And it also allowed us to build key relationships, primarily with the companies themselves, and offer value and show how we could partner and support each of those companies, and also with industry partners like Verizon. So Verizon underwrote our program last year. It was a fantastic partnership that's continued into this year. And we work with people like Oculus and HP and just kind of all the major industry players that are all looking for ways to connect and add value to the startup ecosystem. And in many cases, we can be a conduit for those relationships and benefit everyone. So it's a win-win.
That's great. And there's an interesting convergence there of your skill set, your curiosity, but then going to a meta perspective on it about how can I be of greatest service to the greatest number that are coming into play here. And that resulted in part, I think, in the Lumiere Award for Distinguished Leadership from the Advanced Imaging Society. You were one of a select group of people, that year that received that, and part of that had to do with your work in fostering the growth of technology professionals, specifically women in this regard. With the 20, we'll just use that data set of 26 companies here. Thematically, what were the one or two or maybe three things here that all of them had in common that, and I mean, and not necessarily from their go-to-market service or product, but outside of the funding dynamic, what were the major challenges that they had to actually work with to get to that graduation point?
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of the key challenges across XR have to do with communication. I mean, just in this short talk with you, I've used 3 or 4 terms that are all related to the category, but not broadly understood. So there's semantic challenges, there's conceptual challenges, and this is all so brand new that explaining to whether it's a customer or a partner or a funder exactly what you're doing has an extra dimension of challenges. I think that's something that startups are always contending with, is how do I very concisely and clearly explain exactly what it is I'm doing. When you're so close to the problem and you're so passionate, sometimes that can really muddy the waters. And with XR and these new technologies, it's even more difficult because you're starting from a place that there's less common understanding between you and your audience oftentimes. So that's one of the key things we work on is how do you communicate? How do you boil it down? And sometimes that means distancing the message from the technology. Many of our companies don't talk so much about how they're doing what they're doing, at least right off the bat, as just getting down to the problem and helping their audience to really understand what and why they're doing what they're doing. And so those are the types of that's the type of coaching and the type of education that we provided through the program. And then oftentimes it's just making the right connections. And again, this is common with many startups, but I think in some cases very acute in XR. There's actually a lot of research on how oftentimes women entrepreneurs don't necessarily have the right network for a variety of reasons. There's a lot that goes into that, but making the right connections both for funding and for advancing one's product and getting more visibility is really, really important. And so we try to bring in the right folks and broker the right kinds of introductions such that that network can start building and some of that momentum can take hold as well. So those are a couple of the key pieces that are fairly universal. And then beyond that, I think there's, the specific pieces that each company has to solve. And that's a little bit more unique depending on the sector. But those are the couple of things that stand out as the general kind of universal challenges.
Good. And anything different, just from a gender perspective, because I'm assuming that, all of these firms, were in some way, shape, or form either founded or run by women.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So from a gender perspective, anything that, that particular demographic dynamic set up for them in terms of what they needed to address to become successful?
I think it's tricky to, I hesitate to overgeneralize because I think some of the barriers were up against, I have experienced this directly as well, are universal. And again, there's a lot of research that shows that women do face, and even one example I like to point to is a study out of, it was published in the Harvard Business Review. I think it was originally done in Scandinavia, actually. Looked at the language that VCs use when they're asking women entrepreneurs questions versus men. And even the questions were, in the cases of women, automatically assuming a certain amount of, they were closed-ended questions that were really focused on risk and barrier, versus with men, they were open-ended and focused on success and potential success. So the orientation of the questions was already coming from a place of essentially assuming failure and assuming success. Yeah. And so that's one of many examples of women have a different experience when they're building a company. It's not, I don't think it's in most cases that that we are different in terms of capability or anything, except in some cases maybe, you know, better positioned, particularly if it's a product that's geared at women. But there are more barriers, and then that's just true and quantifiable. And I think that's important to acknowledge. And that's a lot of what we talk about with our companies is it's an unfortunate reality of our current world and systems, but we need to acknowledge that we're starting from that place and therefore need to be, you know, extra persistent and creative in how we're going to overcome those barriers. And also recognize that that can mean we can build an even better company, because every time we come up against one of those challenges, it's an opportunity to be wiser and stronger.
And that is the, you know, one of the key reasons I wanted to have you on this show talking about this. The Stoic philosophy, philosopher Seneca, I think at one point in time said that the obstacle is the way. And and I'm very specific with this in terms of, you know, and I was familiar with that study you cited, you know, that the question structure, the bias that informs the question is different, and it's, you know, measurably different.
Right.
So that becomes an opportunity rather than a barrier if you look at it through that lens. It becomes an opportunity to do some things that, would not be possible otherwise, which can be very interesting. And I want to talk a little bit about that when we come back from this break. I want to thank you for listening. I want to also invite you right now to go to blainebartlett.com. And on that site, which is my personal website, you'll see services up on the top menu. I'd like you to click on Leadership Mastermind. Now, why I want you to do that is we have structured a mastermind program that is very unusual and it is very powerful. And by going onto that site and clicking that link, you'll be taken to a landing page that is an invitation to join this mastermind. It's a 52-week-long exploration of what it takes to be a highly effective leader in today's fast-changing environment. You won't regret it. And if you've been liking what you've been listening to on these Soul of Business podcasts, how does one become a leader that can keep connection to the soul of business? That's what we look at. That's what we're about in this mastermind program. So again, go to blainebartlett.com and click on the services link. And there you'll find the link to the Leadership Mastermind program. Look forward to seeing you there. Thanks for listening to this little commercial. And now back to our show. Welcome back. We're talking with Martina Welkhoff. And before we took the break, we had identified a couple of things here that women in particular are dealing with as entrepreneurs. And this is particularly salient, I think, in the tech space. The assumption built into VR, not VR, venture capital, VC conversations from, for males, typically it would be questions organized around how are you going to be successful. For women that are coming to the table, it would be organized around how are you going to not fail? What's the risk mitigation dynamic here? So just that difference, focuses energy in a different way. Where my attention goes is where my energy goes. So as you worked with in the incubator with WXR, how did you leverage that? Because I think it's a wonderfully powerful lever for success. That question.
Definitely. Well, I think the first piece is acknowledging those realities. Like I said, really, and surfacing the research, surfacing the empirical information where we can to equip our entrepreneurs with that knowledge, and in some cases with actual tactics. Like that article specifically had some tactics that they suggested on how to reframe and reclaim the dialogue. And I think that's a really important piece. And something that, so in some ways, what we built with the accelerator is what I wish I would have had as a first-time entrepreneur, and as a young woman with a woman co-founder, and not really understanding at that point what an anomaly we truly were in the tech space. And so a lot of it is about community and creating a safe space where those stories can be shared and those strategies and tactics can also be shared. So, creating a support base of common experience and making sure that there's always a place or a person to turn to when you do come up against a wall, because I think emotionally that's very important, but also just in terms of actually coming up with a way to climb over or get around whatever barrier you're facing, having that key network of peers and mentors to call on is really, really essential. And that was something early on in my career I didn't necessarily have. And so we wanted to kind of bake that into everything that we were doing.
Andrew Carnegie at one point in time was asked what he considered in actually in Think and Grow Rich. This was actually highlighted by Napoleon Hill, that Carnegie said that the secret to his success came down to one word. Now this is me saying the one word, mastermind. But what he was talking about was, I had a collective group of people, and it was Firestone, it was Thomas Edison, it was some folks that he would gather together with on a regular basis, and the only purpose of that, and today we call it networking, but it was intentional networking. And they would bring to the table something that they were working with, something that they were wrestling with, and collectively the mastermind, the individual minds coming together to focus on one issue, became the solution. And Andrew Carnegie, the richest man in the world at the time, said that was the secret to his success. He would not have been successful without his mastermind. Now I mentioned that because one of the things that I think is important here, you've mentioned community 3 or 4 times, and you were board president of Seattle Women in Tech for a number of years, I think 4 years. And you basically, and this is me as an outsider looking in, that became kind of the gold standard of a networking group in the tech space, particularly for women. There was so much going on in that organization at that time, and I haven't followed it since you left. But the buzz was palpable. And this will start migrating us a little bit into a conversation about WXR Fund, because you are funding entrepreneur organizations as well here. But your time there, your tenure there at the Seattle Women in Tech organization, as a networking organization, what did you pay attention to, and what did you want to foster that was perhaps a little bit unique compared to traditional networking, industry networking groups?
Yeah, that was a really exciting chapter, and key actually to everything that I'm doing now, both in igniting my passion and providing some fundamental learnings that then transferred to what we're ultimately doing at WXR. I'd say 2 key differentiators there was, first of all, we were intent on having difficult conversations, on creating a forum where we could really dive into some of the things people were uncomfortable talking about, particularly at the time. It's since thankfully become more normalized, and there's a lot more examples of these types of conversations in the public space. But at the time, people weren't really talking about what was really going on with gender bias, and what was really going on with age discrimination, and specific stories that people experienced day to day. Those like I often like to say, the death by 1,000 cuts sort of thing, where it's not necessarily the egregious moments, those happen as well, but it's all the little things you have to contend with as a minority, as a group facing bias. And so those were the kinds of conversations we tried to surface, and the kinds of stories we wanted to spotlight in an authentic way, and allow individuals to tell their own story. And then the second piece I would say that was different was we were proactive in inviting male allies to the table. So I think it's very important to have women-only spaces as well, and we did occasionally do that. But for the most part, our events were very integrated, and we tried to again, proactively encourage men to participate, because I think even for the best intentioned male allies, there's some reticence and some fear sometimes about diving into those kinds of spaces. And so we did a lot of proactive outreach. We had men on our board. We always had that in mind when we were designing our programming, to try to, as much as possible, bring men to the table and talk about how we could, across genders, work together to change the story. And that, I think, was a pretty successful strategy overall.
Yeah, based on results, I would say that's true. Yeah, the definition that I work with for leadership is co-creating coordinated movement, and it's a definition around inclusion. And one of the things that I've always admired about you is how inclusive you are in your leadership style. With every co-founder that you've ever worked with, inclusivity has always been, what you were true northing to. Yeah. With the WXR Fund, which I'm going to separate that from WXR as the accelerator. What caused you to move to the funding side of that dynamic?
Well, that was always the intention from the beginning. And
Okay.
I firmly believe that, I think we can do a lot with education and communication, but we can only go so far without resources. And I think at the heart of the matter, it's a funding problem that we're facing, that women-led companies are under-resourced across the board. And there's a huge opportunity in that as an investor. I mean, this is kind of classic arbitrage opportunity where these companies, women tend to outperform yet are undervalued. And it's infuriating, but also, motivating for me. And so, so the fund was always kind of the end goal with WXR. And like I said, the accelerator was a way to kind of build toward that. And then in late 2019, we were able to, do our first close for the fund and start actively making investments. So that was a great milestone. And I would love to, over time, build bigger funds. And I think as the industry matures, we'll be able to mature the fund as well. Right now, we're focused on seed stage. And seed is my favorite stage, because that 0 to 1 journey is such a thrilling one, and one where I get personally very excited. So, I think staying focused there, and over time, continuing to build out the fund and be more aggressive in our capital deployment as the industry matures and there are more opportunities.
Great. Martina, I want to thank you. We're getting close to the close time here. And you've got a baby to go back to. So you've been listening to Martina Welkhoff, Managing Director and co-founder of the WXR Fund. Where can people find out more about what you're up to? And is there anything in particular that you'd like to point them to right now?
So the best place to keep up on the WXR Fund is Twitter. It's just at WXR Fund. I'm also on Twitter at Welkhoff, and both of those places tend to be pretty active and up to date in the latest and greatest in what we're doing. You can also sign up for our newsletter on our website, WXRfund.com, and that comes out monthly with news both about the fund and the XR industry more broadly. I just want to do a quick plug for our most recent investment, which was announced just a few weeks ago, a company called Obsess, based in New York. The CEO, Neha Singh, is an incredible leader and really the perfect person to lead this company, coming out of both Google and Vogue. So she has a rare intersection of technical expertise and fashion expertise. And they're doing some great immersive shopping. So there's lots of recent press on that, and I'm very proud of that deal. It was our first deal that we co-led with the Venture Reality Fund. And we have a couple more deals we're working on now. So come January, there'll be more announcements.
That is exciting. I love it. I love it. Guest today, Martina Welkhoff, and good friend, longtime associate, just in life. So, Martina, thank you so much for making the time here. You're listening to Blaine Bartlett, and this is the Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. You can find out more about what I'm up to at blainebartlett.com. And my plug here for that is go to the website, blainebartlett.com, and Up on the top, resources, click the link that takes you to the Mastermind program. I would invite you to take a look at this Leadership Mastermind. It is unique, and it will actually transform the way that you approach thinking about leadership, and it will improve the way you actually lead in your organization. So, blainebartlett.com, Leadership Mastermind. Thank you for listening, and until next time, have a great rest of your day.